Oh, shit, it is recording. All right, you ready to do this?
Put that as the intro. All right, you ready to do this? It's already done. We got to get our
Done. What's the deal?
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 Yo, what's the deal?
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
Hey, what's the deal?
Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Discourse.
Hey, it's your girl, Jay Callie.
We're back again for another episode of What's the Deal? A lot going on in the world.
There's a lot going on in this studio right now.
It is, thankfully. I was in such a terrible mood this morning, and we're finally out of it. And by say we, I mean if I'm in a bad mood, it's hard for me to not bring the rest of the place down. So we're out of it.
Good.
So to pivot completely 180 from that tone, can we talk about Jemel Roberson?
Yes, unfortunately.
So if you've been watching the news, hopefully you haven't. That's why you're tuned in here, because we're going to give you what you need. Last week, a security guard named Jemel Roberson in Robbins, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, became a hero when he stopped a possible mass shooting at a nightclub that he was working at. He deterred a couple potential assailants and actually detained one of the possible shooters. Mm-hmm. And as he was detaining him, the police showed up responding to shots fired at this place, and some type of altercation. Disputes are everywhere. Police ended up shooting him to death.
Yeah, so what took place exactly, just to get a little bit more specific, Jemel, he's the security guard here at the club, Manny's Blues Room, and there was an altercation between a group of people, and they left, and one of the guys came back with a gun because, 2018 and people just don't know how to manage their emotions. We've talked about this on the show several times. Yeah. So he returns with a gun, Jemel being the security guard. He stops the guy. He disarms him. He shuts down this potential shootout. And as the police walk in, Jemel is on top of the guy with his knee in his back, kind of detaining him, because that's his job as the security there. And he had a gun in his hand. And apparently the police came in and they kept saying, drop your weapon, drop your weapon. And then, all of the patrons in the bar were like, no, he's the security. The guy on the floor is the shooter. Like, get the guy on the floor because this is unsafe. And the police, I guess, just maybe not hearing or maybe being afraid, which I still don't understand, shot Jemel anyway. And they claimed that they didn't realize that he was the security guard. He wasn't wearing anything that identified him as the security. And now Jemel's family has an open lawsuit, and they're saying, well, he clearly was wearing black and a hat that said security on it in plain sight. And everyone was shouting, he's the bar security. Don't shoot him. He's the bar security. And then you shot him and you killed him. And he's a hero. And now we have to talk about him as a victim. And it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, I will give like a 5% degree of understanding that you're a police officer. You show up to a shots fired call. You see a man holding a gun.
Right.
You're tense. You're on edge. I get that. But we've seen plenty of instances where police can be patient with people they know to be active shooters and terrorists. And they are patient and they talk these people down and they apprehend them without any violence, without any death. And in those situations, you don't have a crowd of people coming to the now victim's defense. Mm-hmm. So we had a bunch of patrons here on his side, reassuring the officer that this man is not the threat. And here we have his murder anyway. And the thing that immediately came to mind for me, and we haven't said this yet, if you don't know, that Jemel Roberson is a black man.
Oh, right.
Police officer was white. And to me, this is a perfect exception or evidence of why this idea for gun right advocates are that the only thing that can stop bad guys with guns is good guys with guns. And we should all be armed because that's how we're going to stop this wild stuff from happening. Well, that sounds great in theory, but what if you're Jemel Roberson? What if you're his son? What if you're the people at his church that he played for? And what if you're the people in the bar? What if all those people, what if those people maybe would have been willing to put their lives on the line and take risks and things like that? If you can end up dead after doing that act of like heroism, I mean, what does it say about that fake ass argument, to be honest with you, that the only one that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun? Because the fact of the matter is, we know police roll in hot, and we know the law in any number of ways that protects them from making errors in judgment. And it makes it virtually impossible to actually prove that they didn't err in judgment, but they did something purposefully against the law. So what do you do if you're a person that wants to arm yourself to save the day, if you know in the back of your mind cops might come in and you'll be the one dead?
And it's sad how frequently that happens. And you know what? I am typically the person who's like, let's just talk about the facts. Let's just look at what happened, and then I give my perspective on whatever it is that took place. And my perspective is typically, okay, cops are tripping. Like, they out here shooting people. They out here making bad judgment calls. And I can obviously understand how it can be confusing and how it is very scary to be around a man with a gun and not know if he's the one that's going to shoot you or save you. I get it. We feel it every day when we are around police officers. However, I would love to start hearing instances where police did something that was above and beyond and just heroic, because that's the rhetoric that I hear a lot from like Blue Lives Matter supporters. Not that Blue Lives don't, but just like they have a certain group of people who are like, no, they're heroes, they do this, they put their lives on the line and blah blah blah. And yes, they go within their general call of duty. I don't often enough hear about police officers going above the call of duty and like just being heroic or stepping out or being patient with whether this person is a criminal or a savior, or taking the time to listen before they make a judgment call and then ending up doing something miraculous that like saves the day. And you're like, oh, this could have went left, but instead it went right, and now this cop is worthy of our praise. But too often I hear about police making stupid mistakes and ruining the day, and not nearly enough am I hearing about police taking risks that are advantageous and that like prove to be,
yeah, and
the
no
best
doubt,
option.
and no doubt it happens, right?
Right, exactly.
But
that's my point.
Yeah, but I think the problem is that there's too many instances of the opposite that overshadow it. And it's, I mean, I think police officers in general in our country are celebrated, as they should be. It's dangerous work and everything, but the fact of the matter is they also need to be accountable like any of us would be. Any of us who have a job and we're not performing the way we need to be,
right,
somebody's going to come to us and say, look, you got to shape up, you got to do better. We know your job is hard, we know you've been under stress, but the performance isn't where it needs to be, right? And we just don't see that in law enforcement. And this is the thing that we got to address. And how do we do that? It's hard. I mean, there's organizers in D.C. and all around the country, but we're in D.C., so I know these people specifically. There are people organizing to change those policies. I was at a hearing for the police collective bargaining agreement earlier this week, which was super last minute, and it got passed through 2 days after that because that's really all the time that was available. So that was kind of a fail, unfortunately, for getting popular feedback from the public. But there are a lot of efforts, specifically with stop and frisk in New York has been high-profile efforts to make that unconstitutional. In D.C. as well, we're trying to collect data on stop and frisk to show that it's ineffective. But this is going to be an uphill fight, and the question I always pose is, why do we never hear from police officers an outcry to say, this sucks, we don't want our officers to be in that situation, so we're also interested in finding ways that we can change this, right? But the pattern persists, and
right, the pattern persists.
They seem to be okay with it because it's all about defense, defense, defense. They curl back and they defend their position, whatever it was, no matter what. And there's no acknowledgement that they can do better, that they want to do better, and that they acknowledge that this was an unfortunate outcome. They do that sometimes, but only in a way to pay lip service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard not to become disheartened. Obviously, I'm just going to skip the spiel because I literally say it every week, and I'm just tired of it. Moving on. So many of you, of course, may have heard about the wildfires that have been blazing for literally what seems like forever in California, but they've started spreading a lot more rapidly in this past week or so, and we've been hearing a lot of now celebrities talking about evacuating their homes because, I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why we've seen it more in the news lately, because it hit like Bel Air and the ritzier parts of California. And so, famous people have now been affected. But more importantly, there are lots of people who are missing in California. People are searching for their family members, young to old. 71 people have now been reported as dead since these fires have started. And they've been raging on for
what's
quite
the number?
a while.
631 missing people, I think was the last one I saw.
The last one I saw was well over 600 people who are still missing. They haven't been, you don't call people dead until there's proof that they're actually dead, but they're missing. But 71 are for sure dead. Over 11,000 homes and buildings have been destroyed in California since these fires have started. And that is, we say it, we're tossing the number around, but 11,000 places have been destroyed by fires that seem to be uncontrollable. Firefighters have been working around the clock to put these fires out. And as we've talked about on previous episodes of the show, inmates have also been used as firefighters, and they've been working hard to put these fires out. And it seems like it's to no avail. Yeah,
so let's break this down two ways. We'll come back to prisoners.
Okay.
Because we talked about that a little bit recently, but I want to have a little bit of an update onto that. But as far as are they impossible to stop? It seems like that, right? And like the firefighters are getting overwhelmed. And Trump last week set off a Twitter firestorm by criticizing the California Forest Management and saying that this was their fault for how they are maintaining and managing the wildlife areas out there. But at the same time, a few months back, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, 99% Invisible. So shout out to them for a really great and relevant story. They were talking about these wildfires in California and some research from an expert named Jack Cohen. And what this guy did is he started researching some fires back in the 80s and found patterns in when people were calling 911 to report fires. Mm-hmm. And this guy's whole theory is it's the way we're building and designing our neighborhoods that leaves them vulnerable to fires.
I've heard that.
Because he was finding out that before the fire reached a neighborhood, 911 calls were coming in, and it's because embers from the fire, which, the wind pushes the fire, so the embers get ahead of it, were landing on people's houses and getting caught in corners of crooks on their decks and between angles of the roofs and setting fire. And there's a massive kind of vulnerability in that. And so that's why firefighters a lot of times can't stay ahead of it, because they're fighting the fire and the fire is kind of jumping over their head maybe and keep moving on.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting because, again, Trump is criticizing the way the forest management is maintaining the forests, but at the same time, this is a bigger issue of, are we being smart and thoughtful about how we're actually building homes, how we're designing. And it was super fascinating episode 317 of 99% Invisible, if anybody wants to look up that episode. And he really said there's 100 feet zone that you got to think about when you design these neighborhoods. And so 100 feet away from houses, you got to have trees planted far enough away to sort of block some of these embers, because the trees are pretty resilient. They're not just going to catch fire from the embers.
Wouldn't they just...
And then you got to have other gradients of the way you set up shrubs and stuff on the ground, lower, further in. And then essentially what it does is it limits the ability for the embers to get there. Once the fire gets to those trees and keeps coming, each set of 10 or 20 feet until you get to the house is designed in some way to limit and slow down that fire. And it includes to not having as much tall grass lawns, and some people have these types of trees and things that they just love, but they go up out of nowhere, they're just so flammable. And so those things don't make sense, but people are hard-headed. And even in the news now, you can hear people yeah, well, we know we're in a risk, but we don't want to move, or we don't want to change the way our home is, our lifestyle, and things like that. And it's a tragedy, but there's a lot more we can be doing. And so hopefully we can smarten up and start making these changes, from a policy level. Can California government say, look, we got to build houses differently? And it doesn't matter if you like the way your house was. We got to be smarter about this going forward, because this is an expense to all of us.
It seems like there's always fire in California. And it has to be something. I don't know if it's because of like just the geography of California, or if it's because of the way that they're building homes. It's just like, what is it about California? Is it the heat? Like, is it because it's dry, but it's just always on fire?
Well, they had super extended period of drought recently, and that affected, the vulnerability of the lands to catch fire. And so that's one of them. But just the increasing tumultuousness of the climate. We're having more extreme weather on either side. Lower temperatures, much hotter temperatures. The drought is more extreme, and all these things kind of can come together and have impacts. So that's another reason why building better would be smarter, because if the climate is changing in a way that's affecting and making the fire season longer and more deadly, I mean, we got to do something. Build more fire resilient houses. And again, like this guy on the other podcast was saying, design and lay out the neighborhoods better so that there's better space and more strategically. I mean, it just makes sense to me. I've lived on the East Coast. We don't really have wildfires, though.
The thing that's interesting to me, and this might sound a little bit like a rant, but human beings, like, we have the capacity and the mental capacity to create so many of the things that we need to prevent things like forest fires or whatever the issues may be that are just plaguing humankind, hunger, drought. We can change this. We can control the weather. Like, we've just developed and become so smart. But we let issues plague us for so long because people are so stingy with resources and with knowledge, or if they haven't figured out a way to make the most money off of it, they hold on to it. Like, if we know what the solution could be, we're too lazy to change our lifestyle, and we complain when entire states burn down.
Or some people have interests that are entrenched. And I'm actually glad you said that, because that's another aspect. They said when this guy brought his research and his evidence to his superiors and officials in California, one of the ways that they thought they could be combating all these wildfires is honestly through the lumber industry, right? So cutting down trees, turning that into lumber and milling and getting it out as products. And so that was a concern that one of his superiors had when he brought it to him. He said, you're going to put me in a hard spot, because this is a huge industry that's relying on this approach to fire prevention, thinking that if we just get more logging in there, that's going to thin out the forests and be safer for us. And so you have those kind of entrenched interests in a lot of ways. Same with why people are hungry and starving, because we have a lot of food companies and interests. We can't just pivot to do this because they have their whole business model. Right. And then they say, oh, well, we can't do it because then, you're going to ruin our income, our profitability and jobs, and you can't threaten jobs. So a lot of it is so tied up and entrenched in money, which is for the worse a lot of times. And speaking of money, back to the fire, to the prisoners fighting fires, who we've already reported get less than $2 a day in a lot of cases. And something interesting that I came across since last time we talked about these wildfires is that in pretty much every state, felons are prohibited from becoming firefighters now outside of prison.
What?
Yeah. So you get these people in California are getting trained to fight these fires, to risk their lives, to die. Some of them are dying just as much as other firefighters. And when they get out, legally they can't become firefighters after prison. Why? Because you have to be a licensed, certified EMT, and pretty much all requirements for EMT certification prohibit felons from applying. So we have these people ready to and willing to sacrifice their lives to do something that theoretically we all would admire, right? You see a firefighter, you say, that's cool. They're not doing that to be cool and for the fame and to get rich. Like, that's a sacrifice that we respect people for doing. And here these prisoners are now, they've quote unquote paid their debt to society. They're out. And they don't have any option.
just when you think the problem can't get any worse, like, oh my gosh, they have prisoners fighting fires, or like, oh my gosh, they're not paying them anything, not even putting like commissary on their books, like, what the heck? So now when I actually do become a resident outside of the prison system, I already can't find a job. I've been trained in this profession that is highly respected, that would give me purpose in life and all these things, and I can't get hired to work there because I was in prison. But that's so...
It just doesn't make sense.
It literally makes no sense, and it's just so discriminatory, and I'm so sick of people. First of all, what is the reason why people don't hire felons in the first place? Like, I've never understood why people say no felons. Like, okay, we're afraid you might murder all of the other employees here or sell drugs to them. Like, what do you think I'm going to do as an ex-felon that's going to just ruin your company? Like, in a small extent, I get it, but in the greater scheme of things, for them to just come out of jail and not be able to find any work, I don't understand what's the big freaking deal.
Right, and I mean, I like the point that you made, that this is finally something that they would be able to plug into, which is exactly what they need coming back out of prison. So recidivism rates are high. Recidivism is being... Are you returning back into the prison system after you've been released? So those rates are high. And it's why? Because we don't give them any opportunities after the fact. So here these people sacrifice their lives. Some of them die. They take great risks in prison. We send them out and say, well, thanks for that, but good luck with whatever you're going to be doing now. And they don't have options. And a lot of it just comes down to personal bias.
I get it why the Republicans are so crazy and why Republicans are always freaking talking about state rights. California should be able to make an adjustment to the law and say, listen, all the rest of y'all might not want prisoners on your firefighting team, but these Cali prisoners, we need them, first of all, because they've saved the state so many times. California has been using prisoners to fight wildfires since World War II.
Wow.
And they still have this trash policy on hiring prisoners as professional firefighters. The prisoners are the only people in Cali who know how to fight fires.
Right.
That's why y'all state burning down. Goodness gracious. You would think that people would put on their thinking caps.
And they no doubt have the ability to change that policy. So it's going to be up to somebody in California to make
they
those
can change
moves.
it.
I'm sure they can.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, this is not a federal
All of
oversight.
you MAGA hat wearing people, get to Cali and make their state laws make sense. Get there now.
All right, moving on. Let's do a quick... I just want to run through this whole thing with Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, real fast. We don't have to get into a lot of the opinion and the back and forth and projections of what does it all mean, because tons of people do that and none of us really have an idea. But Jeff Sessions, Attorney General of the United States, he's basically the top cop in the country who decides what law enforcement priorities are, what kind of prosecutions go forward, and a lot of other law enforcement related things. He, quote unquote, resigned earlier this week, but his resignation letter said, per your request, President Trump.
Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
So those of us in the real world quickly roasted him and said, you got fired. Don't try and fake it and look, like reporters who had headlines that said he resigns. Twitter for sure, Facebook, anywhere on social media, which is where most of us see reactions before we talk to people in person. Everybody kind of roasted him and said, sound like you got fired, my dude.
I'm trying to figure out.
But here's why it's important, right? And here's why maybe he wrote this letter of resignation, but it might have been a way to get at Trump, to get back at Trump, because by saying per like your request, like you wanted this of me,
right?
He's called in into legal question the appointment of the new Attorney General. So Attorney General is appointed, you have to be approved by Senate to get that position, right? Mm-hmm. You get nominated by the president, Senate has to approve it. Anyone in that position has to be appointed, except in special cases. So the question now is, if he resigned on his own, then the president has legal standing to put anyone in his place in the time being as interim, because this was unexpected. It just needs to be filled. If he was fired by the president, then the deputy attorney general legally speaking, is the successor to that position because the deputy is also approved by Senate, and that's a position that needs to have approval. So there's two legal cases being filed right now, basically to make that point, to say, okay, if this guy was fired, then, and the point of that is you can't have the president nominate someone, get approved, and then fire him just to put someone he chooses that he likes better in place. You know, it's to keep the due process and the checks and balances and everything here. So that's where we're at right now. Everybody's concerned because what's it going to have to do with the Mueller investigation about Russia and collusion and Trump and corruption and things like that. And I will add that a lot of people think the Mueller investigation is probably way too far along at this point, that it's going to be hard for anybody to really derail it without making big political splashes and waves, and that might have, you know, consequences for them. So we're going to leave it right there, but that's what's happening right now. There's a couple legal challenges to say that the deputy should be the guy, and the deputy will be good for Mueller because he's so far been the guy sort of protecting the investigation, letting it go on. Whereas Whitaker, who's been assigned, seems to have been assigned purely because he has been an outspoken advocate on stopping Mueller at all costs. He's literally written and been out in public outlining steps of how you could slow down this investigation. So there's a whole lot of shady stuff around this guy. He's not qualified, professionally speaking, in his experience as well. So that's where it's at. We're going to leave it right there. And let's go on to another high-profile public figure, the man Stan Lee.
Don't you have that chipper tone in your voice when you talk about Stan Lee? Because I'm hurt.
Yeah, so he died recently. Stan Lee is the man most notably associated with the Marvel Comics universe and legacy. And a lot of people were super sad about it. People from all over the pop culture spectrum. Man, I should have seen what the response was from politicians.
It's weird because
any politicians R.I.P. Stan Lee?
I don't pay attention to politicians because they're all fake anyway, and
ouch.
It's just the truth. But you know what I realized after Stan Lee passed away is you don't know how much you care about a person until they're gone. Not to say that I was like this huge, like, oh, posters of Stan Lee on my wall. There obviously aren't. But when I heard about his passing, like, I was genuinely very sad. I was sad because, like, I respect him as a comic and as a businessman, you know, as a powerful figure just in pop culture, like you said. But also just, like, I love the Marvel universe, the comics, the movies, like everything. And I'm like, what direction is it going to go in? What's going to happen? We're at the height of Marvel. Like, we just hit 10 years and all the movies that I've been, like, waiting for forever finally coming out, reaching, like, I don't know, the culminating peak. And I'm like, oh, my God, somebody's going to jack this. Stan Lee, please, your spirit can still linger. You know you still have time. You don't have to transition yet. Come to my house. I have lots of ways to communicate with you. Please.
My God. Yeah, so and I kind of agree, because normally with celebrities whose art and work that I identify with and I value, I don't always really feel any way personally when they die. But I was actually a little surprised how sad I was to hear that news. And he's done a lot of great work. First, let me get this out of the way, that there is controversy as to the credit that he takes for creating certain characters and how much of the work that he really is recognized for and takes credit for. So there have been lawsuits, notably about Fantastic Four and ownership and creative rights. That stuff aside, whatever degree that he takes, you know, credit for these things, he had a hand in them in some way. Right. And he did a lot in a lot of capacities at Marvel, so he still deserves that credit. And what was one of the things that was so interesting about Marvel Comics is that his legacy was he pioneered this change of heroes who are flawed. And the best way to contrast that is to think of Superman. Clean cut, tall, attractive looking guy, no hang-ups, no problems. He just wants to be a journalist and save the world. Boom. On Marvel side, and Stan Lee really helmed it, is you have people with they're facing struggles in their own lives.
Right.
You know, Wolverine is a big fan for a lot. Is a huge icon for a lot of fans, and he's a perfect example. Right. He struggles with the mental trauma of things he's gone through, from like his past life and the experiments people put him on, and he deals with rage and anger, and this is true of a lot of characters in the Marvel universe, and that's what people liked about it. Spider-Man, in the early days, spent as much time talking about the high school and like college trials and tribulations of Peter Parker as it did swinging around the Empire State Building, kicking Lizard in the face and stuff. And that's what people loved about it. And he also took a big stand against, various forms of bigotry and discrimination and racism. And that was also a lasting legacy that I haven't heard a lot of creators and people dispute. He wasn't about it, it was me. What characters were created is in dispute. But this legacy for sure is one that he definitely had a major role in. And I think that's valuable.
I'm actually really sad now just hearing you talk about it again and all the things that make him great. I'm sitting here like, man, this is beautiful, but also I feel feelings. I feel real life feelings.
Yeah, so I've been a big comic book fan most of my life. Sometimes right after this, I go to the comic book store around the corner and I pick some stuff up.
Do it all the time.
Yeah, because I'm kind of a nerd
Stanley,
like that. So
may your soul rest in peace. I literally wholeheartedly mean that. I cannot wait still to see what happens with the rest of the Marvel universe. I'm sure that it's still going to continue to boom and grow. And, I mean, all I can do is just be as excited as I was before. That's it.
we'll leave it right there. So with that, we're going to come back with an amazing interview, and I'm going to let Jay Cali tee that up on the return. We have a legislative analyst for a council member in D.C. She also runs a mentorship organization, and it's pretty tight. She does a lot of awesome work. So we'll be right back.
While we're on this break, we want to remind you, do not forget to share the podcast. Share it to all of your social media platforms, your Facebook, your Instagram, Twitter. Don't forget to use the hashtag #What'sTheDealPod whenever you share anything. And like and subscribe the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you listen. Thanks for spreading the love. You know we appreciate you. All right, so we're back in the studio. Right now we have a special guest who just came in. Special to me, special to hopefully all of you after this episode airs. Miss Dana Hall, who is the founder of Aya Inc. and also the legislative analyst for Councilmember Trayon White. So she's going to tell us a little bit about herself.
Sure. Thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be here. As Angela mentioned, I founded a nonprofit organization called Aya Inc. We mentor young women of color, both at Howard University and in Southeast DC, and it's an intergenerational mentoring organization where college students are mentored by young professionals, and then those same college students mentor high school students. I am also the legislative analyst for Councilmember Trayon White. I've been in his office for 2 years since he started office, and for those who don't know who he is the council member who represents Ward 8.
So I want to start talking about you're the founder of Aya Inc., right? So can you tell us a little bit about that organization, what exactly it is that you do for young women?
Sure. So the organization started in 2014, and it was really conceived by my experiences as a student at Howard. I have a lot of mentors and I have a lot of mentees, and I really wanted to combine the best of both worlds. And so what we do is we take college students at Howard and we pair them with young professionals like yourself who will just offer them guidance. We have workshops that touch on professional development, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills. And in their second semester in the program, we pair them with high school students that they then mentor. And so the mentee becomes the mentor, where they work with high school students. And with the high school students, they focus on college readiness and professional development.
Yeah. Did you come up with that model for like passing down the mentorship?
Yeah, I did, because like I said, it just really came from my experiences both as a mentor and a mentee. And it was a model that I hadn't seen done before. Usually when we think of mentorship, we think of this wide gap between maybe a high school student and a seasoned adult. We don't really think about sort of just the next generation up. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, then the students are able to get maybe just a little bit more. They can see, what their immediate future may look like if they take this career path.
Right. And so with that type of model, like using young professionals and college students and high school students, though the goal is to kind of generate professional development and to help them with their careers, it seems like lots of strong relationships are also built when you have a program like that.
Yeah, so innately we've developed sort of a professional sister circle when we come together, if you will. That's how we kind of describe it to the guests who join us, and that's how it feels when we're in these sessions, because there are a lot of conversations that we have that you would have with your big sister. If you're going on a job interview and you're a black girl who has an afro and you have questions about, should you just walk in there and be your true self, or should you just kind of, comb your hair out or blow dry it out? Or, what are some of the things that are unique to black women that, older black women may have opinions on, but someone who has just went through it may have some different opinions on it.
So what made you realize the need for a program like this?
I realized that, I live in Southeast D.C., so starting with the high school students, I remember what it was like being a first-generation college student, trying to understand student loans, trying to understand, what is the point of an internship, an unpaid internship, and, just some of the things that my mother hadn't experienced and therefore couldn't prepare me for. And so just mentoring on my own, I realized that there's a real opportunity. There was a real curiosity about college. And if we could bring college students to them, then it would make a world of difference. And then along those same lines, I can instantly remember being a college student and trying to figure out, what am I going to do? How can I lead when this is my first job? What does leadership look like for a 21-year-old who's working their first job?
Right.
And there are people who have very interesting experiences who were able to shed light on how would I negotiate my salary, or how would I confront, these issues. And so really being able to take all of my experiences and pour them back into two places that mean a lot to me, which is Southeast D.C., where I live, where I sort of came into my own in terms of my adulthood, and Howard University, which was the first place that I left, the first place that I went after I left home.
Yeah.
So for the Howard students in the program, is it a requirement that they are both a mentee and a mentor? So is that the part of the model, that it goes both ways, that people have both roles?
Yeah, and so the Howard students are pretty much the glue. They are required to experience both, and so they start off as mentees, just because I want them to experience what it's like to have a mentor, and because I want them to understand sort of the culture that we are trying to replicate when we go to Southeast. And so they are required to sort of work in dual roles.
Yeah, I really resonate with everything that you're talking about, as far as with Aya Inc., both as someone, obviously a black woman, someone who is a graduate of Howard University, a young professional, and a resident of Southeast Washington, D.C. So I could only imagine the impact that this program would have had on me as a high school student, especially with the opportunity to matriculate up and be a college student and still be able to be involved, to receive mentorship, and to become a mentor. So, I don't know. I just feel like it's such a beautiful thing that you started this type of program, and that you've been able to reach out to your own network, get your own mentors involved, right, to help you with mentoring some of these girls, and to just be able to pass down that, sacred knowledge.
Yeah, it's fun to watch the college students. It's fun to watch the high school students go off to college. They keep in touch with their, college mentors, even if they don't go to Howard University, which we would love for them to. And it's fun to watch our college mentors, go into the working world, and now they themselves are young professional mentors, mentoring this next generation of college. So it's you get to really experience it in a lot of different ways, and it's really fun to watch.
So I'm wondering what has either surprised you when you founded it, from what your expectations of needs and services you could provide, and how is your ideas of that model kind of changed since you've been doing it?
So I was surprised. Originally, when we started, I had in my mind that the high school students, we would focus on like professional development and just very sort of straightforward things. And I didn't really think about the role that sisterhood would play. I mean, yes, with mentorship comes an element of sisterhood, but because we almost kind of built a curriculum in the beginning, I didn't realize how it would evolve more where the high school students really want to have conversations. They want people to listen to them. They want to talk about, boys, and they want to talk about all of these things that are not necessarily connected to our mission, and we find ways to kind of bring them back. Or if you want to talk about boys, what is that in the context of also being a college student and being focused when you get there? And so I've been surprised at how we've been able to stay on track with our mission, but still pivot into what it is that the students need and want to discuss.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that it's you had kind of a rigid idea of what the needs are and how to fulfill them, but it's actually a lot more softer guidance, so to speak. Yeah. Soft in the sense that it's not organized and regimented, and so that's what people are getting more so better benefit out of is the relationships and the interpersonal exchange. Yeah,
and I think that by having those relationships, the high school students especially have been able to just broaden their perspective holistically on what it means to be a college student, what does it mean to be a young black student in college, what does it mean to give back. And not necessarily giving back when it comes to money, but, how can you give back in other ways, and just the obligation that you have once you've made it to a certain point, and how you can take all of your experiences and pour them into the next generation.
Mm-hmm. So what exactly does the mentoring look like as far as like time? How much time are they spending together? Is it in a certain setting, or are they just going out around the city? Like, how does it look?
So it's our academic year looks a little complicated, so I'll always try to explain. Where we start off during the fall semester with, you say cohort 1 of college students, and we recruit them all during the fall, and then during the spring semester they have their workshops, and they are not engaging, with the high school students yet, and so they really just focus on themselves and their mentors. When they come back from the summer break, that same cohort 1 will go into that next fall, and then they start mentoring high school students. All the while, we're recruiting cohort 2. And so it's sort of this overlap.
So it's rolling.
Yeah, and so it's sort of this overlap and rolling year where they're able to get the experience for themselves and have that time, and then the next year or the next semester, they're able to give back.
So let's say there's a woman who's out there right now and they're listening to this podcast, and they either want to become involved to be a mentor, or they want to enroll their daughter, or maybe even a college student. How can they get involved?
So they can email us at info@ayaincorporated.org. Our website is ayaincorporated.org, and our Instagram and Twitters are both AYA Inc. And so they can get in touch with us either by email, website, or social media.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So you also mentioned that you worked in legislation with Trayon White. So we want to kind of move into that and hear how you get involved with those types of things.
And so I think, first of all, can you start and just give us like very base, what is your like job description? What does that mean to be a legislative analyst?
And so in my role in the council member's office, I do, there's 2 of us who work on legislative issues. I have a legislative director, and then there's myself. I write legislation. I analyze whatever legislation is coming down the pipe hole. So if the mayor is introducing something, or any of the other council members are introducing something, I review it, I summarize it for my council member, and I offer recommendations to him. Sometimes I draft amendments, and so if the legislation is okay, but we think of ways that we want to make it stronger, I'll come up with amendments. And then also with the legislation that's coming out of our office, I'm sort of making sure that it's going through the full process, that we're having hearings, that it's being voted on, that we're getting the votes. If you think about, the first season of, well, maybe not, but if you think about the first season of House of Cards, it's somewhat, just trying to get those votes in so that we can get good, solid legislation passed that's going to really impact our constituents.
Okay, yeah. So I'm actually glad that was the last thing you mentioned. So, where do the people come into play in either your job specifically in writing and the recommendations maybe you're going to make to the council member, or how does the council member go about incorporating the constituents' views on these things?
So our council member is 35 years old. He's the youngest council member, and he represents a community that is plagued with violence, the high school dropout, teenage pregnancy, homelessness. We have all of these different things that we're battling. And he ran a campaign that was based on, the theme of it was We the People. And another theme of it was do something. And so we sort of combined those two ideas to say that we are going to get as many people as possible, people who are not traditionally involved in politics, people who don't really care about politics, and engage them in figuring out the solutions for their own communities. And so he's always been very intentional about bringing people together. He's a community organizer. And now that he is the council member, he does just that. And so when we have hearings come up, we call just the regular, people in our neighborhoods, not the lawyers or not, sort of the big shots that are usually there who may have time to come and testify, but the people who are going to be immediately impacted by this legislation. And a quick example of that is there is what's called a tax increment financing that's on the table, and that means that the city would be subsidizing and giving money to a developer to build a hotel, office space, and housing in Ward 8 in Anacostia. The problem with the housing is that it's 97% of it is going to be unaffordable to the residents that live there. And so what we did last week was we broke out, we all broke out our phones and said, okay, we need to call all of the people in Anacostia who may be impacted by this, and we need to, one, have a community meeting and say, hey, this is what's happening. Do you want it to happen or not? And then, two, there's going to be a hearing on it. And so if you have strong opinions on it, if you know that you can't afford this or you know that you don't want this, then you should come and testify at these hearings. And so we engage them at the ground level about anything that's coming to our desk.
Okay, yeah, I like to hear that. Because, I think the process of government for most people seems so like on the moon, right? Like we can see it and we know it's there, but we don't understand how it happens and unfolds. And can you talk about like the balance? You need to make these recommendations and you guys are doing work. How much of that work is based on your understanding of the issues and your understanding of the constituents in Ward 8 versus that outreach that you definitely make sure to do as well?
So, what I would say is, the good thing about, people have mixed feelings about politics. But I think the good thing about politics is that you vote these people in, and therefore you can hold them accountable. And since you voted them in, they should know you. And you should, know them. And so there has to be a stronger relationship between the politicians and the community. And I think that what we see across the country is that people are elected into office and then they lose touch with just kind of the same thing that people say about rappers. It's like you leave, you make it big, and then you don't come back. So it's like that same concept when you think about politicians sometimes, which is why it's important that politicians stay grounded with their constituents. And so part of my job and what I've done in these past 2 years is I've held what's called policy meetings with some different legislative sort of stakeholders, people who have been engaged in politics, and we have had meetings where ordinary people who don't know politics, who don't know the legislative process, who don't understand the budget, we break it down to them and we give them worksheets and we sort of come together and we say, this is the process of creating a bill, just sort of almost like Civics 101. And then we would go into these small groups and we would have them come up with ideas. What legislation would you want to see? Then we talk about whether or not those ideas are viable. Some of them may, no one's going to support your idea because it may cost like $1 billion. So let's think about like some other ways that we can achieve these goals. And so we've also been able to have those kind of meetings in his office as a way to just pull people in and get them engaged.
That's not what I would have guessed. If you would have asked me at the beginning of this, what is a legislative assistant or analyst for a council member do, I would not necessarily have said, oh yeah, it's about like I'm blanking on the word. When you get people together in a room.
Community organizing.
Oh my God. So I think that it's like, I actually wasn't expecting you to say what you said at all about like having people come in and like teaching them how a bill gets made and passed and like what their ideas actually look like. And I think that that's super useful because a lot of times people want, like politicians, they want to just have people talk about, well, what's the issue and how can we fix it, versus saying, listen, this is what happens once I see your issue. I'm considering X, Y, Z. The better way for you to like let me actually stop and listen and hear you and be able to help you is if you word it this way, if you phrase it that way. This is what's going to happen next to your idea. Then someone's going to draft up a bill, and it's like, oh, so it's not just a complaint anymore. Now it's me actually being an active participant in the government as a citizen who makes suggestions to my council member in a way that's useful.
Yeah, and I'll say that, that this way of approaching politics is really a reflection of our council member because, like I said, he is a community organizer, was a community organizer. He was the guy who would walk on the steps of City Hall and say, with picket signs with a bunch of people and say, no, we are not for this, or, we want to see this happen. And so not all council members and not all legislative assistants or analysts, do this kind of work. It's really a reflection of us carrying on just how he wants to run his office, and then us also having relationships with different organizations and people who really want to see these sort of policy meetings or this approach to policy manifest. We have people in our community like Ayanna Ford who will sit with me and say, okay, let's build out a plan to deliver this to our constituents in a way that they'll understand, whether it's, giving it to them straight and making it quick, this is how you create a bill, or people who really want to get deep into the nuts and bolts of it and truly, just kind of get involved, and who really want to be engaged after the meetings, who want to, be able to say, we want to come to City Hall and we want to see this bill happen. And so, like, who do we need to talk to? Who are the committee chairs? Who are the, who really want to take it to a deeper level?
Mm-hmm. And how often is it that you actually, like, get to engage with people in that way? Is it on a schedule? Like, oh, every week we're going to go out and do this type of community engagement? Or is it just when a certain issue arises?
Well, last year we were doing it monthly, and then I became pregnant and went on maternity leave, and so we stopped doing it monthly. And then this year, since I've been back, we haven't been able to get it on track on a monthly basis, but we still, just like I mentioned, with the tax increment financing issue, when there are big ticket items that are coming up, then we make sure that we not only have those community meetings, but we also have those trainings to prepare people to write their testimony and whatever it is that they need to do so that they can be as involved or engaged as they want to.
So thinking about your office specifically that you work for, but also keeping in mind that we have an audience around the country, if people want to are hearing this and they're interested in saying, okay, this is possible for me to get involved, how would they reach out to your office to give feedback and to be most effective in making sure their representatives, whether they're in Washington State or in D.C., where are they looking to reach out and connect?
So the website for the council is dccouncil.us. And our office phone number is 202-724-8045. I would say, and my email address, my work email address is just dhall@dccouncil.us. I would say anyone who wants to get involved or engaged in the work that we're doing, just reach out to us directly, and we are happy to really collaborate. What we've seen is that there are lots of amazing ideas that touch on progressive values across the country that we like to mimic here in D.C., and so I'm happy to talk to anyone who has experiences or who have questions about ways that we can really spread this idea of not just how to engage community, but how to really elevate progressive values across the country.
Okay, so if you're in Washington, D.C. or Ward 8 specifically, you know how to get in touch with your council member. And if you're listening somewhere outside of D.C., you know that these people are there and hopefully as receptive as you guys are, because it sounds awesome the way you have everybody engaged. So we hope this encourages people to really get active. If you have an opinion on something, say so, because I think in my experience from talking to people like you on that side of it, it takes surprisingly less feedback sometimes than we think to actually get our representatives and people to actually really move on an issue that they maybe wasn't on your radar, you know? So, hopefully, I mean, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming in. And if you're out there listening, it's easy to get involved. You want to close it up here?
I just want to say thank you again, Dana, for coming in, for sharing so much insight on I Incorporated, on what you do as a legislative analyst. And honestly, I learned a lot today. I'm going to reach out to you offline to do some mentoring. I really am. I got to get my life together. But thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you both.
One last piece of business before we get out of here this week.
As you all know, it's Thanksgiving weekend, and we just want to say that we are so thankful for you, our loyal listeners. As you know, Thanksgiving weekend is very, very busy. Steve and I will both be having some delicious turkey with our families. So next week, there will not be an episode. Please don't cry. We will be back the week after that with our regular, smegular, degular, What's the Deal? All right, people, thanks so much for tuning in another week. What's the Deal podcast?
You can follow us on social media
at Steve Discourse.
And you can catch Jay Callie at
It's Jay Callie, ITSJAYCALLI.
We got to send a big shout out to Clifford Cartel for composing our theme music. And wherever you're listening to this, make sure you subscribe.
Family, subscribe.
Write us a review.
Share the podcast. Subscribe to it wherever you listen.
Share it with your friends, family, your loved ones. Heck, give it to your enemies. We don't care. Help us spread the word. We truly appreciate it.